clearly, please let us know if you're excellent. Thank you for the thumbs up, and can see the slides on the screen. Well, it's really lovely to be here today. Thank you very much for inviting us along and for giving us the opportunities to speak. We're really looking forward to meeting everybody in the networking sessions and the sessions later today as well. So as Lucy said, we're going to be talking a bit today about our journey through COVID and our experiences of working online through the pandemic and how that led to us developing an online platform. And our plan is to give you a bit of a demonstration of that platform and show you how it works. And so you get sort of an insight into what we're doing with it and why we developed what we developed and where we're going next. But first of all, we just wanted to share a little bit of background.
We did. For those of you who don't know already, At My Best is the product brand that both Michele and Lucy have mentioned that we've created a number of years ago. And the main way that we tend to use the products with At My Best is around facilitation and coaching. So a dialogue is a really important part of that process that we follow. And the strengths cards are a really key part of that. So for a number of years, we've used the strengths cards to facilitate those kind of conversations, to help people to notice what's working well and to encourage people to focus on the strengths, not just of themselves, but also the strengths that they notice in others around them, and to engage in more of those conversations. And so the pictures you're seeing there of the kind of workshops that we've been involved in over the last few years are fairly typical. Often people are very engaged and they're gathered around a common space, and they're using the cards as a visual and tactile stimulus to help facilitate those kind of conversations. And our approach has been very much around the development and growth of strengths and focusing on what's working, rather than the assessment and measurement approach that you might associate with some other strengths-based tools. So you can see how dialogue is a sort of key part of that whole kind of process that we take. And the strengths cards have been a key part of that. So Michele, I don't know if you want to say a bit more about the cards themselves and how that came about, what they look like and so on.
Yeah, of course. And many of you will have seen the cards, but our strengths cards are a sort of image on one side and word on the other. I don't know how well you can see that with all my lighting, but single words and images of a variety of different things. As Martin said, to encourage dialogue, to help people to develop a narrative around their strengths. We have no definitions with any of our words, and that's because we want people to define their strengths for themselves. We want them to come up with their own explanations as to what those strengths look like for themselves, if they're reflecting on their own strengths, or in other people if they're giving feedback or talking about the strengths they see in others. We use the cards in a real variety of different ways, in one-to-ones, in small groups, in teams, for a variety of different purposes. As I said, to help people to identify their strengths, to give strengths-based feedback, to talk about team strengths, to just shift the focus of the language that people are using towards focusing more on appreciation. Why do they work? I guess, it's a very simple tool, isn't it? A set of cards, images and words, really very, very simple. I think what we find is that they work because of that simplicity. They don't get in the way of the conversation. The tool is just the prompt. And that's very much what we wanted, is we wanted something that allowed people, as I said, to develop their own story, to take ownership of the explanation, the story they were developing, take ownership of their own strengths. And the cards allow people to do that. They're very flexible. You're sort of moving them around, you're engaging with them. They're very engaging. So you can use them in a variety of different ways, but you are taking ownership through that process. It's very blatant, isn't it? If I'm going through and selecting these words as words that I think are my strengths, then it's very obvious that I'm doing that, and I'm very much connected with the story and the exercise that I'm going through. They always generate positive energy, and I think that's a real key part of the cards, and lots of positive emotion comes with the conversations we have. And as a consequence, I suspect in part, they're a great way of strengthening connections between people and having really productive, positive conversations around strengths.
Sorry, try and find my unmute button. Yeah, so given that this was a key part of the way that we work, it was obviously an interesting time for us last year when we all faced this common challenge of having to work in a very different way. And we very quickly discovered how many other people around the world had a similar challenge, because we had a lot of calls and messages from people who were saying to us that they used the cards a lot in their work, whether that one-to-one or in groups. And they were asking for any suggestions about how they could now use them in this new world and working virtually. And so what we realized very quickly is that we needed to do something back at that stage. And so we've been talking actually for quite a few years previously about creating an online version of the cards. Now, we'd already done it in a very structured way. We've created a self-reflection tool that's a structured process that uses the strengths cards. And as Lucy said earlier, we've got the strengths-based 360, At My Best 360, which uses the strengths cards again, but in a very structured way. And we'd kind of played with this idea that we might create something which was much more freeform and much more like using the cards in the real world. But it had always been too far down the to-do list to actually do something with it. And then, of course, when this situation arose last year, it suddenly seemed like it was the moment for that kind of tool, so that people could use it in the way that they use the real cards. So what we did back in sort of March or April time last year was to very quickly start creating a prototype. So over the course of about 5 or 6 weeks, we went from zero to having something which was pretty basic but worked, and we could get that out there and get that available for people who wanted it. And that's what this looked like here. So you can see the prototype there. It was very simple. The cards were on the left hand side, and you could either work with the photo side or the word side of the cards. They were kind of like two separate decks of cards, if you like. And you simply drag the card from the left hand side over to the right hand side, and you could add some post-it notes, sticky notes to the screen there too. But that was it. You couldn't flip them over or anything like that. They felt a bit like a card, but a bit limited. And so we knew there was loads more we could do with it, but we wanted to see whether people found it helpful. And we had really good feedback from it. People found it useful. Their clients found it useful. And the simplicity of it actually was really appealing. So that was encouraging. And so that did make us think, well, okay, let's see where this naturally would progress to and where we would go next. And look at adding some more functionality that would make it even more useful, and try and make it feel like it was getting some more of the benefits of the real cards. So it's very easy to take the imagery or the text from a card and put it on screen, but it doesn't necessarily replicate that feel of what a card gives you when you're working in a face-to-face environment. So we wanted them, although they couldn't necessarily feel physical unless maybe you're using a touch screen, we still wanted them to look and feel like you were moving a real card, that you could flip them over, and also that it provided that autonomy for the end user so that they had control. So when we had a group situation, that we could bring people into a shared space so that whoever wanted to move a card could move the card rather than just someone having to do it on their behalf, and that we could all see the same thing. But also that we had the flexibility for the facilitators and the coaches who are using them, because that's been a really a key part of the whole process with the set of cards for us, is that there's no one right way to use them. There are lots of right ways to use them, and people find their own ways that work for them, for their style, that work for their clients. And so we wanted to maintain that kind of sense of flexibility as best we could as well. So there were, as you can imagine, lots of different ways we wanted to go with it and could go with it. But the response we had to that initial prototype encouraged us to take that next step.
And alongside the sort of testing out of the prototype and all the feedback we were getting about that, of course, we were also then having conversations with people and being reminded that people use lots of different decks of cards, and there are lots of brilliant decks of cards out there that people wanted to be able to use online. Now they could no longer use them face to face. And we were talking to people like Sarah Lewis, who's here today, about their decks of cards and using their decks of cards online. And so what we decided to do was actually broaden out our remit, not just in terms of how the cards would work online, but actually to develop a platform, which is deckhive.com, to host not just the At My Best cards, but lots of other decks of cards as well. And so that's what we've done. And we'll show you in a minute some of those decks of cards that are on there, but Sarah's are on there, and I think she's going to be using them later today. And that really informed our process. It was really helpful to have creative partners on board from the outset of the development of Deck Hive to inform what we did and how we did it. Because of course we know how we use our cards and how other people use our cards, but we don't necessarily know how other people use their cards and their requirements. So it's been a really fantastic process to work collaboratively with a number of people and develop Deck Hive and put the cards on the system. So what we want to do now is just show you what that looks like.
So I'm showing another screen now, so hopefully this is visible at your end. And you will have a chance to play with this a bit later on. So if you're joining one of our sessions either later today or tomorrow, where we're going to be doing an interactive session, you'll get to experience what it's like to be a guest in a session and to be able to move cards around and engage in a small group discussion with that. But for now, what we'll do is just show you basically how it works in the interest of time, so that you can see and maybe get some ideas about how you could use something like this yourself if it's useful. So we're going to use the strengths cards just to show you a couple of different things that we often do in the sessions that we've been running in the last year or so, or the last few months with this system. This is still very new. We only launched this actually just before Christmas in its beta mode form, so it's continuing to evolve. But what you have here on the left hand side is the deck of cards. So I'm going to open the deck of cards here, and you can see that we can scroll through them all, and we can pick out ones that we particularly want to choose in relation to the activity that we've been set or the question we've been posed. But we can also flip all the cards over, and so we'll do that just to demonstrate a short exercise that might be useful in a coaching scenario. And so we would sometimes ask people the question, which picture reminds them of a time that they've been at their best? As simple as that. And use that visual metaphor to help engage and start that process of reflecting on all those times before when they felt like they've been at the best and what that looked like. And so they might choose a particular picture, and then they just drag that across to the table over here. So once they've done that, we can close that down. And then of course we can ask them a series of questions. Now we might sometimes write those questions down on sticky notes on the screen and get them to type in their responses to that if we want to capture that for future reference, or sometimes we'll just do these through the normal route of actual conversation. So we might ask why that picture represented something that when they've been at their best before, why that has a connection for them, what the situation was, tell us a bit more about that. What did they do in that situation, and how did it feel? Because that's obviously really key with the whole strengths-based approach, is to connect with the emotional content around this stuff as well. So how did it feel when you're at your best in that situation? And then we might expand into what strengths did you use? And of course, then we might then open up the deck again and look at the word side of the cards and ask them to pick out 5 or 6 or maybe more of the strengths that they can recognize in themselves in that moment. What was their role in that particular situation when they've been at their best? And then maybe beyond that might be, what other strengths would other people have seen? Would they have seen something different? Would they have seen the same things? How do they know? Could they get some more data from other people that might help build that story and take them forward? So that's just a very simple way we might use this kind of activity. But you can see by giving the user the autonomy to choose the card for themselves and to be able to move it around, that just changes the dynamic slightly, and having something visual to focus on means it's not quite as intense as it would be if we were having an eyeball to eyeball kind of coaching conversation.
So that's one of the ways we would use the cards, the strengths cards, in coaching, one-to-one coaching. We also use this exercise you can see on the screen here now a lot in teams in particular. There are a variety of ways of using it, but often used in teams, where we run a quickfire feedback process. So we take each person in the team in turn. So here you can see James is in the spotlight, and you can see that Martin's created tables. You can see the initials at the bottom, the first couple of letters of people's name at the bottom of the screen, and that's different tables, and we've got a table for each person. So this is James's this table. James is in the spotlight, and we'd ask everybody in James's team to pick one word from the deck that is a strength that they really value in James. So everyone just takes a minute to select their card and pull it over onto the table. And as Martin said earlier, the way Deck Hive works is everybody is in the session and everybody can see what each other is doing. So if I was in this session, I would look and see the same screen as everybody else, and then I'm pulling my own cards over. So then you end up with this selection of words for James, and now we've moved on to Lee. We've got this collection of words for Lee at her best, and then and Marty here, you can see how we've gone through the whole team and chosen what they're like at their best, and then we just go around each person and ask them to say which word they chose for the person we're spotlighting at the moment and why. So everybody gets that word and a couple of sentences very quickly, and within 5-10 minutes they've received a lot of appreciative feedback around what others in the team really value in them. And that's a fantastic exercise. You can imagine the positive energy that comes from running that exercise. It's brilliant for strengthening team connections, as well as for raising people's awareness around their strengths and sort of helping to overcome those strengths blind spots that we so often have around the things that others really value in us, and can be a really good conversation relatively early on in the strengths journey for a team to help them to start thinking about how they can help each other to be at their best more often and what that means for the team's strengths.
And it's interesting, actually, we've in the last year, we've also started to use this exercise online with people who don't even know each other that well. And that's been quite a revelation, hasn't it? We were quite surprised at just how well that's worked. We thought it might not work very well when we first tried that face to face, when people have only spent a few hours in the company of each other and only had a couple of coffee breaks to connect and interact. The idea then of identifying strengths in somebody that you've only known for that short time was a bit of a brave step for us, but it worked very well face to face. But we found even online, provided you can give opportunity for people to connect with each other properly through some interactive activities, the majority of people are actually comfortable doing that. And we do seem to see that it helps to strengthen the bond between people, because we're asking them to look at each other through that lens about what are the qualities you notice and what do you value and appreciate, what strengths are you seeing from the way this person's interacted with us as a group today. And it's quite common, we find in the strengths masterclasses that we've been running, that that people want to stay connected with that group. Whether they ever do, we'll see, but there's certainly the intentions there, because they feel they've had such a strong connection with each other during the course of those just 4 hours they spent together. So it's really nice, and it's nice to be able to play with these kind of things and find out what works. So they're just a couple of examples, and there are many others we could share, I think, about how you can use these kind of tools around strengths. But as Michele was saying before, the Deck Hive tool isn't just about the strengths cards, or even just about the At My Best cards, because we also have another deck of At My Best cards, the Good Question cards, that I think you'll probably see a bit later on if you join the session that we're running later. But we do have a number of other decks in the library. So in just a couple of minutes that we have left, what we should do is show you a different deck. So you can see here the whole library that's available, so you can start a session with any of those. I'm sure Sarah will be sharing the appreciative inquiry cards later, and maybe even mentioning the positive organizational development cards that she's created that are on here. But there are others that you may recognize, and there are others that will be adding in the next few weeks, which also have a positive psychology bent as well. The intention isn't that everything on here will be positive psychology focused. It's just obviously that's an area of particular interest for us. So that has a sort of a slight skew in that direction right now, but that might balance out a little bit more to other subject areas in time as well. But should we just start a session with the nature of emotions cards? Michele, do you want to say a bit about that?
Yes, definitely. So this is a different deck of cards, which is about, we can be, again, very flexible, can be used in a wide variety of ways. It's a beautiful deck created by Candice Dick, and it's a series of photographs, beautiful nature photographs with emotions on them. So it can be really useful for emotional check-ins. It's one of the simplest ways I've used Deck Hive over the last few months, is to use this deck at the start of a session and to ask everybody just to scan through the deck and choose one or two emotions that they're feeling now. So simply as an emotional check-in, either at the beginning, middle, or end of a session. And a really useful way to get a sense of the mood in the room, so to speak, which can be so much harder when we're working online, and can just encourage people to focus on the here and now. We know all too often people come along to training sessions, don't they, or coaching sessions, still thinking about the thing they were doing 5 minutes ago. And I think that's potentially even more of an issue when we're working online and we're not even physically moving space from one meeting to the next. And this is a very nice place marker exercise to bring people into the moment and to encourage them to reflect on the here and now. Lots of other different ways you can use those cards, but a really nice, simple, quick exercise.
So I'll just leave that now, and just as we finish, I'll share my slides again, just so I can share with you a code which we've created for you.
And this is a code that if you decide you want to have a look at Deck Hive, if you sign up for an account and then sign up for a subscription after that, then you can put in this code and it will give you a free month to have a bit of a play. And when you have your free month, you then have access to all of those different decks. So you can have a play with all of those over the time.
So there we go. So more later.
Thank you very much.
So much. Thank you, Martin, Michele. Thank you. I really would invite everyone to go and have a look at that. It's I've been playing around with it a bit and definitely plan to play around some more. There are quite a few opportunities for anyone who's a bit creative and never gets anything finished to actually finish something much quicker than you normally would. Okay, so the next person I'm going to introduce, and I'm going to try and